Hello and welcome back to the Aftershock. We're in our third season covering the San Jose Earthquakes with Quakes Epicenter. Tonight we've got Robert Jonas, Alex Morgan, Colin Etnier, I'm Phil Leyva, and we are following a 2-1 loss on the road against Atlanta United. Gents, we just about talked about everything but the Earthquakes match because of how frustrated we were with the end result, even though there were some really great performances and a lot of positives to take out of this match. Colin, I'm going to kick it over to you first here. What are your initial thoughts after the match is now ended?
Well, look, the fundamental thing is the experience of a sports fan can be cruel. The pain comes with the territory. That sucks. There's nothing worse than blowing a lead. There's nothing worse than giving up 2 stoppage time goals to turn 3 points into 0. The experience sucks. But when we have the time and the space to reflect on it, I think that ultimately we won't be super unhappy with the direction of the club. I was gratified by a lot of what I saw tonight, and it didn't make me any less optimistic about the rest of the season. So experientially, tonight was awful, but I actually liked a lot of what I saw. I liked Jonathan Mensah quite a lot. I think that is going to be a missing link in the back line. I like the fact that they can actually play in shape and structure and protect a lead when they're up 1-0 on the road against a very good team. It actually looks like we might even have Luchi Gonzalez early. So I'll give it over to the man himself if once he's been queued up. But yeah, if we don't have him queued up, not a whole lot more to say other than to say that this is a team that looks like it will be competent this year. It's a team that looks like it will be able to defend, and that's better than nothing.
Yeah, I think it's good to point out the fact that Jonathan Mensah does change the complexion of the back line in terms of its organization and experience. And we're talking about somebody who has a ton of caps for the Ghanaian national team and a lot of MLS experience, including an MLS Cup win with the Columbus Crew. Before we get Luchi here, Robert, I'm going to go ahead and bring you into the conversation here. How about some of your thoughts regarding the match?
Yeah, it was something I wanted to see is how that midfield played with Carlos Gruezo there, and whether Jackson Ewell would have to take on too much defensive responsibility or whether he was going to be able to play a lot in connection with the forwards. And I saw a good mix of both. I mean, he was playing, I would say, very situationally aware of when he needed to be forward and when he needed to be back in help, and that was something that I had an opportunity to talk to Jackson about in the preseason, and he was very excited about some of the direction he was getting from Luchi Gonzalez and in what he was going to be looking for in terms of being able to break lines, but also to continue with that defensive responsibility we saw him kind of under Mateus be responsible for. So I know we'll have more to chat about with that, but for Jackson, that was quite a game, and I think he did very, very well.
And it looks like we're moving over to the presser. We're having some audio issues here. We've got Jamin working on it, just so folks know. We do have a new format for the post-game press conferences this season. So that's another thing. We're using Zoom this year, it looks like, rather than the format we had last year. So there's going to be some differences that Jamin is working to iron out. Robert, you were talking about Carlos Gruezo. One of the things I noticed with him in the 6th position in front of the back 4, it gave Jackson Ewell a lot more. To me, it looked like he had a lot of confidence on the ball. He had a lot of successful dribbles. He was able to find his own space and rely on Gruezo to kind of be that defensive stalwart that we knew him to be when he was playing in the Bundesliga and had previously been for FC Dallas. So I'm hoping that we can talk a little bit more about this midfield and what you were seeing from Jackson Ewell and in a form that we haven't seen him play in quite a while.
Yeah, it was for me, just to see that, he knew he had someone behind him that was supporting the center backs in a way that, that is exactly what Gruezo is there to do. To Colin, to your point, seeing Jonathan Mensah back there, I don't know the details. It feels like a trade that was probably being talked about maybe before Nathan went out. He's a this is a near, best 11 starting center back. A couple of years ago, he was best 11 in Major League Soccer. And so, knowing you have that behind you have Grueso behind you, it gave Jackson just that much more freedom to make his, to make his impact in a way that the Quakes really needed. I thought it was an off night for Jamiro Montero in the same regard, whether it was the injury in the first minute or just not his game. Jackson picked up the slack in a lot of ways, on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side, and just truly, to me, gave me hope that, this is a year that, maybe Jackson focusing in a position that he is meant to play, meant to play a central midfielder, maybe with that little bit of an advanced role, kind of Michael Bradley like, he's getting that opportunity and a coach that's fully behind it and not asking him to do anything else but what he's good at. And I think that's something Quakes fans should be excited about. I know that was something I wrote quite a few notes on about his performance tonight.
Well, and Phil, Colin, it was looking like you wanted to jump in there on the conversation with Jackson Ewell as well.
Yeah, look, this game, I'll pander to you and your interest. This game is a tragedy in 3 acts. The first act, and by the way, tragedy, but in the sense that, the way that it ends tragically. It's not just, again, I will reiterate, I'm actually not, I do not have a downcast attitude about the way this season will go because of it. The first act was that first half an hour. Obviously, the goal came in that period of time. But the thing that I noticed more than anything was the ball movement, the interplay, the combinations that they were using in that period. They were great. And they were a kind of combination that we had not seen from this team in the same personnel, by the way, because we're talking mostly the same players in the middle and the attacking parts of the pitch. Grueso was the only change, really. The other 5 guys that are playing in front of the defense, they're all the same. So you're seeing different patterns of play from similar personnel. To me, that's what got me really excited. It was like, there is coaching that has taken root here. Now, it's not surprising that in the first game with a new manager, after just a preseason with them, that they can't sustain that for 90 full minutes against the road or on the road against a very good team that has some really high quality players. Fair play, fair enough. But that's kind of the first thing that got me excited. That second act, things got a little bit more ragged, but they were up for it. They were competitive. Atlanta really didn't have many good looks at goal through that middle period. They possessed the ball a lot. The Quakes certainly didn't look as sharp as they did at the beginning, but they were up for it for the next not more than a half hour. That second act, I would say that lasted until the 75th, 80th minute. The third act is where the things started to collapse. Their line of engagement got deeper and deeper and deeper. They were able to possess the ball and move it up the field less and less and less. Part of that, by the way, is just due to the fact that the options they have on the bench aren't comparable to the options. There was a pretty big gap there. And that first goal, it wasn't to do with the line of engagement in open play, but as a set piece, usually there's someone assigned, and you can tell it's Grueso because I saw him doing it in a couple of the other set pieces, who is to step up when the ball, kind of gets played behind the engagement line. He didn't get there fast enough. He got there pretty quick. He closed down the angle pretty well. Almada just, hits a worldie. So for me, it was a really tantalizing segment of what the midfield can look like when combining the way that Luchi probably dreams about. A relatively encouraging segment of they weren't combining like they wanted to, but they were at least competitive in game. The last section, obviously, things fell apart a little bit. But I really wasn't super worried about the midfield, despite the fact that, as Robert says, Jamiro Montero was not particularly great today.
Well, let's flesh out this third act a little bit here of the tragedy. I think that one thing that we can look at particularly were the substitutes. I think you're right that there's a sort of issue with the depth or the bench options here, right? We had all 5 subs used at throughout this last part of the match. We had Carlos Acapo, Benji Kikanovic. We had Skane, Baldissimo, and Tanner Beeson all come in. Were these, considering the options, did Luchi make the right choice in making these subs with a 1-0 lead going into that last part of the game? Was he not left with many options here? Is this what he had to do? When Jamin and Alex were talking to Luchi, prior to the start of the season, they actually asked him when he would be likely to use subs if they had a 1-0 lead and which type of subs they would bring in. And Luchi had mentioned that he would probably do them after the 60th minute. We saw it around the 60th minute. We saw it a little bit after that. But considering the options, considering they had the lead, did Luchi make the right choices with his subs?
Yeah, and I'll take this one as well. By the way, for people in the background here, we're still working on trying to get the press conference up. Robert Jonas, Alex Morgan, Jamin Moore are all in that press conference now, and I'm sure that we'll get the debrief later on to the extent we'll be able to. For the subs, I think that to your point, or to your prompt, Phil, the lack of options is part of it. That is definitely a part of what played in there. But I think he made roughly the right subs and roughly the right times as well. I don't think that any of his major cards would be played differently if it was up to me. I think Akapo comes on for Paul Marie because Paul Marie was getting run ragged out there, and Akapo just wasn't fit. That's the only reason he didn't start. So that makes perfect sense. Cade Cowell had some moments, wasn't super influential. Put in Benji Kikanovic, who's more defensively savvy, in addition to being a good player in his own right. That makes sense. Then now we're starting to get really thin. Now you're starting to kind of reach into a deeper part of the bench where, you're not putting on guys who are better than the guys they're taking off or equal. Trauco had a pretty good game. Beeson is a different kind of player, really. Jack Scan is no Christian Espinosa. That point you were starting to sacrifice quality in order to get energy and legs on the field. And I think that's appropriate at the time that those three guys came in. So I don't know, not much to criticize from me. I think that the issue is in the roster. You have two. I mean, right now they had one healthy center midfielder on the bench in Baldissimo, the only natural center midfielder at least. They had two injuries in that grouping that left them really thin. For the forwards, they're just thin as a roster fundamentally. And so I think it's something for the technical staff to think about, is how to get deeper on those forward positions and what to do if they're down two men in the midfield if they need to. So I think that they probably need to add a guy still. I said this a couple weeks ago in the Aftershock. They probably need to add one more forward at least, and then they get some guys healthy. But no, I don't think that Luchi played it wrong.
Alex, I'd like to bring you in on this part of the conversation. And before you joined us, I just reminded everyone that you and Jamin had actually asked Luchi a question about how he would use his subs going into the latter parts of the game if the Quakes had a 1-0 lead. So I'm curious as to what you think about the way he used his subs in this match and the effectiveness or lack thereof.
Luchi Gonzalez is a man of his word. Last week in their preseason camp in Coachella Valley, Jamin and I sat down with Luchi and asked him that exact question. If the Quakes are up 1-0, second half, when are you making your first sub? He said 60th minute midfielder. That is exactly what he did. He brought 60th minute Akapo on for Palmery. So maybe not a midfielder, a little wiggle room there. But he's a man of his word. He made the early substitution. And we actually just got a chance to speak to Luchi Gonzalez in the post-match press conference. Sorry that we are not able to bring that post-match press conference to all of you live as per usual. Today, the Quakes were using Zoom rather than our beloved Intermedia webinar interface. And so we had trouble streaming that live. We were not expecting that change. But I was there. Jamin was there. We were able to ask a few questions. And so I can help relay some of what Luchi said. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. He looked frustrated. He looked mad. He looked angry. In preseason, whenever we talked to him, he was full of energy and excited to talk about this team. He was not excited to talk about this game. You could tell he was frustrated. He was pissed off to have such a good performance erased in stoppage time by two set pieces. He said the Quakes could have been up 2-0. They could have been up 2-0 and easily closed out that game. That was what he saw. He thought they could have won that game and been up 2-0 easily. And I think he's right. And I asked him, what happened on the set pieces? You have Thiago Almada, World Cup winner with Argentina, all alone at the top of the box. And then on another corner, 2 minutes later, you have the exact same situation. Once again, Thiago Almada alone at the top of the box. What happened? Here's what he said. He said that because of the substitutions that they made, there were some guys who did not know their role on the defensive set pieces. So it sounds like one of those subs was not doing their job right, in that they had intended for Thiago Almada, the player at the top of the box, to be covered in that position. We watched the new goalkeeping coach, Aiden Brown, train defensive set pieces extensively in preseason. He is the assistant coach in charge of training those set pieces. I would be surprised if he didn't account for Thiago Almada alone at the top of the box. It sounded like this was an individual error made by one of the substitutes. And it's a really frustrating one, because for the Quakes fans, it feels like same old, same old. It feels like another brutal loss, like they're getting their hopes up only to have those, hopes sort of snuffed at the very end. It feels the same, even though this was not the same. This is categorically different than anything we saw last season. And Luchi Gonzalez knows that. Luchi Gonzalez was happy with the way the team were playing, especially in the first half, was happy with the way that they were able to play the ball out of the back through the midfield with Jackson Yule and Jamiro Montero, and get the ball out wide to Christian Espinosa in attack. The Quakes were the better team for the large majority of this game. They were more structured, they were more disciplined, and they should have won this if not for some late magic from Thiago Almada.
And Robert, I think we can bring you back into the conversation here. I'm sure you have some things to add as well.
Yeah, it's a little bit of time to reflect, especially on Colin's point about thinking of the stanzas that this we saw in this game. And Alex, I think hearing from Luchi that perhaps his subs weren't ready for for the occasion, and that was maybe part of that breakdown. That's really unfortunate. I mean, I'm sure he is mad, because that's a coach's responsibility to make sure that information is relayed and players are ready for that responsibility when it comes down to taking nothing away from Almeida. Those two shots were fantastic. I mean, he's got goal of the week candidates one and two so far.
I heard Almeida. Was that a slip right there?
Almeida, tomato. It's.
I thought we left that in the past.
I know. Yeah, it's the ghost of Almeida haunting the Quakes in the form of Almada. So there you go. But no, that is interesting insight, and I'm glad Luchi was very upfront about that, because that's a big difference. I mean, Almada was wide open on that corner kick. No one was stepping out to him until it was way too late for that. And I was commenting to the people I was watching the game with. Daniel had not made a save the entire game, and I guess he didn't make a save the entire game if you count the fact that those two shots got past him. He was not tested at all. The defense was doing everything they had to do, and then to break down like that in the last 7 minutes is kind of shocking. And it's going to be the team's got to kind of get back here to San Jose and sort of learn from it. But what a rough way to kind of ruin a really good 70-80 minute performance.
I think that Danielle actually did make one save in the first half from Almada. It wasn't a particularly strong shot.
Not a tough save, yeah.
But he did make a nice low save. And I'm wondering, gentlemen, is there any blame for Danielle on that last minute free kick winner? It feels like it was far out enough. It wasn't strong enough that he should have been able to get there. He had kind of a flappy hand. If I'm JT Marcinkowski, I'm thinking maybe I could have saved that one. What do y'all think?
Not for me. That is top bins right in the corner. Hits it pretty hard. It isn't that close, but it's only about 25 yards out. We're not talking like Cristiano Ronaldo 35-yarder back from his first term in United. So for me, no, not that one. Yeah. Actually, if anything, I would say the first goal is the only one that I would have any questions at all on Daniel. And it's because although it's hit very hard and he's kind of unsighted by it, it's right in the middle of the goal. And any keeper will tell you that, if it's above you physically, like you can cover that, that's not necessarily going to be out of your reach. So, but neither one really is on the goalkeeper. And that's what it boils down to is the first one, Luchi will tell you, Aiden Brown is going to be more upset with the marking and the coverage of the defensive set piece than he is in the goalkeeper, who he also coaches. And the second one, Mensah maybe doesn't need to lunge in on that. It's definitely a foul. But it's not an insane thing to do. I think that, it wasn't a rash challenge or anything, but, ultimately a little bit of aggression ends up costing you. Thiago Almada played at World Cup for Argentina for a reason. He's really, really good. And the best MLS teams have guys like that who can break open a game on their own. The Quakes have Christian Espinosa, who's actually pretty dang close to that, but he's not on Almada's level of take a game on his own and make it his.
Not quite.
Yeah,
Colin, I'm not so convinced. I think that the reason Daniel was brought to San Jose was because his shot stopping stats in Brazil were excellent. They were elite.
Yeah.
I think an elite stopper, should be able to save that. Those are the saves that he was brought here to make. And if he's not making those saves, I'm not sure that his distribution or that the other aspects of his game are strong enough to warrant a starting position over JT Marcinkowski. This is the first game, but I do think it's a seed of doubt that I have in my head now about his goalkeeping.
That's really picky.
I think that his positioning,
really picky,
I think his positioning was off on it. I'm not entirely convinced because I think you can be very certain in that situation that ball is going over the wall into that corner. And I feel like his positioning was off. But look, Aiden Brown is a top goalkeeping coach. And, he was the guy who got Gaga Slonina transferred to Chelsea. And so I'm sure that they will be addressing that. But there is a seed of doubt.
But I throw something out there, though. Elite shot stoppers get closer to balls than non-elite shot stoppers do. So when you look and watch the fact that Daniel got close and got a finger on it, to me was actually spectacularly impressive.
Read it very
Remember,
well.
JT Marcinkowski is a couple inches shorter than Daniel and has a much worse statistical track record. I don't think fans should hang their hats on, if JT was in there, it would have been saved. Now, maybe Daniel, could have done a slightly better job on either one or the other. He is low on the list of people I blame for either of those goals. Gruezo was the guy who stepped up to Almada on the first goal. I don't know if that was his mark. I don't know if that was his responsibility. I think Luchi was kind of implying that, something went wrong. It's unclear whether that means it wasn't his responsibility and he was covering, or it was and he was, far too late. To me, that's number one on that.
Colin,
the second one,
go
ahead, Phil.
I was just going to say, one thing that Luchi talked about in preseason was accountability. That was one of the big points that he made in the interview that Alex and Jamin had with him. And I think I agree with you. When they go back and look at the video, it's really going to be looking at the fouls that led to those goals rather than, I think, Daniel necessarily. There may be, you can get really nitpicky, Alex, but I don't know that talking about positioning in that case is going to, these are all hypotheticals at this point. And I really think that he put forth a pretty good effort in trying to stop those shots. So I think this argument is going to take a few more games to try to see whether or not this is like an issue for him as a keeper. Before you respond, I want to very quickly.
It's nitpicky. I agree. It's nitpicky, but that's where you're left after a game like this where you play so well and then you lose it all because of two defensive set pieces.
And maybe that's a good sign for us. Who knows? Either if I could really quickly, Robert. I just want to direct our listeners and our viewers over to quakesepicenter.com. If you're new to our show, The Aftershock, we have a website that has a lot of great articles. We have information about the salaries that the players make that Colin is in charge of working on. He has a spreadsheet that you can check out to try to keep track of that budget for the team. We also have social media in the form of Twitter and Instagram. Make sure you go follow us at Quakes Epicenter. And I did want to mention the Patreon very quickly here before we continue. You can become a patron for as little as $2 a month, or if you pay $5, which will give you early access to a lot of the videos, the interview that I've been referencing here with Alex and Jamin and Luchi Gonzalez and all the great work that Alex and Jamin did when they were down in Coachella. And I do want to also, direct you all to the $5 tier of the Patreon, where you can actually gain access to the Quakes Epicenter Slack, which is one of the great aspects of that. Alex, really quickly before we move it back over to Robert.
I was watching this game. I had a split screen. I was watching. Half of my screen was the Apple TV stream, and the other half was the Quakes Epicenter Patreon channel, which was going off tonight. There was a lot of energy, so appreciate all of you guys bringing your energy to the Slack channel tonight, and I highly recommend it to everyone.
All right, and Robert, thanks for giving me a moment to do that quick plug there. Interested in your thoughts.
Yeah, not at all. This is no defense to anyone on the Quakes, but I do want to say that as Atlanta was lining up that second free kick, the way they set up their own wall in front of the Quakes wall, the way they were sort of keeping that screen up. I even turned to the people I was watching to and said, "Uh-oh, watch out for this one." And you could see the way even Atlanta was sort of thinking that one out as well. I think instead of really blaming the Quakes for not stopping it, Atlanta put together a really good kick there, and that's something that when you go up against a World Cup winner, you expect some world-class shots, and the Quakes unfortunately got victimized tonight. I wanted to bring up something that kind of struck me from someone else in my viewing party, which a longtime Quakes observer. Final whistle just sort of threw something to the ground. Fortunately, nothing spilled, nothing valuable in the drink category. But said same old Quakes. Here we go again. And I totally disagreed with that. And I was kind of curious, around this room, when you hear somebody kind of say that, I know it's a fan frustration, Colin, you're absolutely right. You can't watch this game and be like, well, hats off to Atlanta. They did very well tonight. No, you're going to be pissed as a Quakes fan, because if that whistle blows at 90 minutes, the Quakes have 3 points in one of the most difficult places in the league to play. 7 minutes of miracle stoppage time. I was waiting for the Lennywigs to pop out by the end of that one. And the Quakes go home empty-handed. Is this the same old Quakes, or are we seeing something we can be encouraged by?
I mean, you can start with the we don't know yet, right? We're 90 minutes into the season. But I think that if we only have to go off of these 90 minutes and make a wild prognostication, yeah, I still put my money on this being a competent team this year. Competent may not be good enough for the playoffs, and it may be. I think that that's kind of where they're at. They're still a fringy, on the bubble team. They're not going to be shipping 69 goals like they did last year with, a horrifying XG underlying that. That's not going to happen. The reason you can tell is that they have a shape, and they actually looked very comfortable defending that shape for a very long time. They gave away 2 set pieces. Again, we can really dig into the particulars of each one, but that's a big difference from. Remember, so with last year, this is the thing that really struck me. So last year, they did have some early goals where then they sat and protected leads. But by the 70th minute, and by the way, if you go up early on the road against a high quality team, there's no league on planet Earth where the team doesn't sit back and try to kind of hold that lead. It's very rare. So I saw some criticism of that. Like, no, it's fine to protect the lead. The difference is in the last couple of years when they were protecting a league, the games would get incredibly stretched because of the man marking system and the way that Almeida had set up his team. And therefore, it was constantly frenetic, and any moment looked like something bad could happen, and frequently it did. The difference here is that you had a very clear structure. You had a bank of 4 for the defenders and effectively a bank of 5 for the 3 midfielders and the 2 wide players. They stayed in their structure. They looked pretty comfortable, and Atlanta was not doing a very good job of breaking them down. Eventually, they got there through set pieces, but that's a very different thing than what we were seeing last year. So that, plus I'd say about 30 minutes of decent possession play at the beginning, and some encouraging performances from guys like Jackson Ewell in the middle of the park. Christian Espinosa was certainly a live wire. If you take those things into account, those are all things to hang your hat on. The things to get concerned about are, limited depth in a couple of areas. Is Cade going to step forward? Is, Montero going to find his form again? I don't know. It's been 90 minutes. But those are 2 things that made me feel a lot more comfortable about the way this season is going to go than last season.
It's interesting that you said that, Colin, because the word that came to mind for me when I was reflecting upon this performance was competency. I think the midfield and the defensive shape particularly showed the players' competency within the system that Luchi Gonzalez has set out for them. And he has said time and again, he wanted to have that organization so that when they had to fall back and defend, that they were able to do that without scrambling. And I think he's very aware of what the system looked like prior under Matias Almeida, and then what Alex Covello had to work with before Luchi had an opportunity to take over this team. And so I think in the first game of the season, that's a really big plus to this team, that they were able to shift so quickly into a competent team. One thing that we haven't talked a lot about yet is the play on the wings, and also Jeremy Abobase's play during this match as well, when we did get to see it. And I think the competent play from the midfield and that strong defensive shape really allowed players like Jeremy Abobase and Christian Espinosa and Cade Cowell, who, let's face it, didn't have the most impactful performance. It allowed him to help create space for Jeremy Abobase. So a lot of what Cal was able to do in terms of how effective he was on the wings with his team was creating that space. But again, we see Espinosa on the right side in the attack. I think at his best in this match. Like, he had great moments where he accelerated and completely changed directions for the Quakes. We saw Atlanta United a lot of times on their back foot, chasing him and really opening up the attack for the Earthquakes. So I think it's great to see that organization throughout, as Luchi said, from back to front, all 11 players being a part of the attack. I think it's really great to see that. And you're seeing it especially on that front line with these really talented attackers who haven't always had that opportunity to play that way because they have other concerns, right? Under the Matias Almeida system, we oftentimes saw the wingers having to play a lot more defensively. They had to worry about other aspects of the field and not really focus on the attack. So, Alex, we just got you back in here. I know you had to take a call. We're moving the conversation more towards the attacking, the offensive side of play for the Earthquakes. Interested in what your thoughts are in regards to that.
Yeah. Sorry I had to step out. Got a call from the Earthquakes spokesperson on the ground in Atlanta. Because of the new Apple TV setup, the way that the post-match interviews are happening has been changed. And so it doesn't look like we're going to get to speak live tonight with any players. I am going to send in some questions, written questions for Benji Kikanovic, it looks like. So as soon as we get the answers to those questions, we'll be able to read them out and share them. But it's a new system for the league. The Apple TV deal has radically changed the requirements that all the clubs have in the structure in the stadiums. So that's why I think they're still figuring it out right now. I think the Earthquakes were caught a little bit off guard by the new setup. And so hopefully we'll be able to figure out a situation in the next few weeks where we can have all of them live on the show again. Look, the offense is a tricky situation because there's one thing that I'm sure about. The defense is going to be much better than it was last year. Jonathan Mensah looked solid. Rodriguez looked solid. He was even playing the ball forward. Rodriguez's ball playing and distribution was much better than I expected. It was really fantastic. He had that long ball over the top for Espinosa that created the first goal. He had a couple of long runs through the midfield that I wasn't expecting. The defense is going to be solid. They're not going to be a team that ships 69 goals again this season. So that's improvement already. That's a reason to believe in this team. That's a reason that they're going to be better than last season, that they, on that basis alone, can push for the playoffs. The offense, I'm not so sure because their midfield is really solid. The midfield tonight, fantastic. Jackson Ewell, Carlos Guerrero, Jamir Montero, they were working the ball through the middle really well. They had structure. They outnumbered Atlanta United in the midfield. That was where the Quakes looked strongest. The midfield last season was one of the weakest parts of the field for the Earthquakes. But because of the structure that Luchi Gonzalez has brought to that midfield, on the defensive half of the ball, they were stymieing everything that Atlanta was trying to bring their way with the compact mid-block. Offense of the ball, they were moving it forward quickly and getting it out wide and looked good. Here's the thing. Here's the reason I'm not so sure about the offense. You have Christian Espinosa, played fantastic tonight. You have Jeremy Obobasi, 17 goals last season. He's already started his tally today. He's going to be good. But you're going to see teams adjusting for that. Atlanta United looked remarkably unprepared. That 101 defending Quakes is that you double team Christian Espinosa and you get two men over to him every time he's on the ball. That's 101. Gonzalo Pineda did not do that at all. That was a rookie error. Other teams, second week, week two, watching this tape, they're not going to make the same mistake. Christian Espinosa is going to get double teamed. Jeremy Obobasi is probably not going to be able to drop into the middle as much and connect as much with the midfield. And that's where I start to worry a little bit more. Because last season, when Christian Espinosa was double teamed, the Quakes didn't have a ton of other outlets going forward. Cade Cowell had energy tonight, but I don't, on the basis of this performance, still don't trust him to be able to create one or two goals every game. So then it's more of an open question for me about where those goals are going to be coming from. Benji Kikanovic also didn't look particularly dangerous in his substitute appearance. So the offense is more of an open question because they didn't bring any new pieces to this offense. It's not like the defense where you have, basically a brand new back line. They didn't bring any new pieces. So you're relying entirely on the tactical changes. And tonight it worked. As other teams start to adjust, I'm not so sure if the outlook is going to be as optimistic as I'd like it to be.
I will say though, Alex, I agree mostly with what you said, but one thing that really stood out in this match was the difference in a year or an offseason made and Jackson Yueill and how he looked on the ball and how comfortable he looked as well. And I think that's going to be something that we should be taking into account in terms of how the Quakes are going to be effective in the offensive aspect as well. So we did talk a little bit about Yueill before you jumped in. I'm curious as to what you think about his performance and his role with the team after seeing him play for 90 minutes in this new season.
Fantastic performance from Jackson Yueill. Fantastic performance from Jackson Yueill. The way he was working the ball with Carlos Gruezo and Jamir Montero in the middle was fantastic. That is what he's able to do. That is what we knew he could do. And he wasn't doing it last season. He wasn't doing it because they had no structure in the midfield, because he was overburdened with defensive and offensive responsibilities. They were asking him to do everything, and he couldn't do everything. But what he can do very well is distribute the ball in the midfield, play quick passes, and then those through balls in behind are gorgeous. He had one incredible through ball in behind on the left side for Christian Espinosa. The Quakes, I think, were unlucky not to finish that opportunity. It was a really strong performance. He didn't look lost anymore. This looks like a Jackson Yueill who knows his role, who knows what he's supposed to do, and is more than capable of doing that. And that was something we saw in preseason as well. In the final preseason game in Coachella against the New York Red Bulls, Jackson Yueill looked really solid. He was the best midfielder in that game, I think. Carlos Gruezo disappeared a little bit. Jamir Montero wasn't able to get on the ball because the New York Red Bulls were bringing such an intense press. The person who was able to get on the ball was Jackson Yueill and have some nice combinations out wide with Paul Marie and Christian Espinosa in that game. And he was doing that again tonight. I'm very bullish about Jackson Yueill this season. And look, towards the end of the game, the midfield got a little bit tired. It was tough not to be able to have Nico Shakiris come in as a substitute. Nico Shakiris is a guy who I was super optimistic about, having seen him play against the New York Red Bulls. On the injury list this week, we don't have any official confirmation as to what the nature of the injury is or what the timeline is, but I'm really, really disappointed that he was not able to get on the field tonight, because I think maybe if he's out there, the midfield would have had a little bit more reinforcement going into that stoppage time.
So Martin Moss made a comment a couple minutes ago, actually just a minute ago, I guess, about the link between the midfield and the forward line. And I think that that's a really worthy thing to think about in all of this context, because, Jamiro Montero, particularly in Luchi's system, but, this is a true 4-3-3. Montero is starting from a deeper position in this game, mostly over to the left of Gruezo. When they're out of possession, he's sitting, right at Gruezo's hip on the left. That means there is a pretty big gap between that midfield line and Abobasi, either as a lone striker when they're really sitting deep, or a front three. And so the things that are going to help that combination is those wingers, if they can, really kind of make magic happen on their own. And you saw Espinosa really being able to do that. So he provided some of that linkage on his own just by skipping past guys, the combinations, etc. But to Alex's point, you can't rely on that being your solution forever, because eventually it'll get shut down and that path will be cut down and cut off. Montero is really the key to having that done consistently. And it's something that Jamin Moore has been saying all preseason, is the offensive ceiling of this team is very strongly linked to how Jamiro Montero is going to be able to get involved and link back to front. If he can push into those half spaces, if he can, break lines on his own and combine with those front three, that's when you're going to see more and more things come through. Because in terms of quality, Christian Espinosa, really strong performance tonight. He's a quality player, and he's been a quality player for years. Jeremy Abobasi, also a quality player, very consistent. Those guys, not worried all about them, but they need somebody who's going to help them link up and help them combine. Montero wasn't there tonight to do it. Maybe Shakiris becomes that guy eventually. He's still 17 years old. So, I don't know if we're going to be able to rely on him to do so. Jamiro Montero is a DP, super seasoned. I think he's about 30 now. Like, he's the guy who needs to be taking that on his shoulders. Obviously, the left wing position, there's some questions there as well. And there's some questions of depth that are all related to all of this, which is, the options beyond those front four. When I say those front four, I'm talking about, the three forward positions and Montero. The options behind them, you have Kikanovic, certainly come on for Cade. Other than that, you don't have anybody who's proven themselves. Shakiris is a very talented player, but he's yet to prove himself in MLS. Usini Buda is a guy I really like watching, but he has yet to prove himself in MLS. And they don't even have a proper backup striker if you consider Kikanovic a left winger instead. So I think that they are at least one man short. And beyond being a man short, they have a couple guys who, need to take a step forward to add more quality. And most importantly, they need Montero to step and really kind of earn his paycheck as a designated player. I should also mention that I agree with Alex that, Gruezo was, certainly seemed to run tired by the end of this game. He only had part of the preseason with the Quakes, so it's possible that it's related to it. But this is probably not going to be his best game in a Quakes shirt.
Robert, maybe we can expand a bit on this conversation about Jamiro Montero, because that's something that we haven't talked a whole lot about yet on the show. And last year, he really was kind of like the point guy, right? He and Christian Espinoza were the two that the team really relied upon to get things going throughout the season. And if there's one guy on the team, maybe aside from Espinoza, that you don't want to have kind of just a mediocre game, it is Jamiro Montero. And not to say that he had a poor performance in this match, but it wasn't a standout performance. So I'm curious what you thought about that, Robert.
Yeah, I was thinking, that left side of the field is so much different than we saw 6 months ago. And by the end of the season, Marcos Lopez is gone, a guy who really stretched the sideline all the way to the end line. I don't see Miguel Trauco being that kind of player. And, with Montero kind of hanging back a little bit more to make any sort of connections on that wing, it just didn't feel as fluid. It didn't feel as ready. Alex made a good point there that Atlanta didn't seem to read the scouting report on Christian Espinoza. Maybe they read too many scouting reports on Cade Cowell, because they were blanketing him every time he got near the ball and really shut down that side of the field. Perhaps that was their strategy all along. It was disappointing to see Cowell kind of put himself sometimes in those situations, but not have the awareness to avoid, being multi-teamed and kind of losing the ball. I think that contributed in some part to why Jamiro Montero didn't have the kind of game that we might expect from him, that we certainly saw Jackson have with more success over on Christian's side, where the ball was playing much, much better. You had Paul Marie, a player much more capable of bombing from end line to end line, keeping the defense honest. It didn't seem like the Quakes had the same sort of ability on the left to play like we saw them do on the right. And to the eye, it just didn't measure up.
Look, I think that the reason that we didn't see as much from Jamiro Montero today is not because he played poorly. It's not because he was missing anything. It's because the rest of the midfielders were actually able to connect and move the ball, and it wasn't, entirely on him in the final third. I think that Jamiro Montero played well today, and the role that he has this season is going to be different because the Quakes are playing a more structured style of play as opposed to Almeida ball, which was just funneling it through to the best players and seeing what happens, without a coherent sort of way of moving the ball forward. Obviously, Jamiro Montero is going to have an adjustment. I thought he played well tonight. I'm not concerned about him at all. We know he has the quality to be dangerous at any point and to lead this midfield and lead this attack going forward. The person who I am maybe a little bit worried about, and we're starting to talk about it in the chat here, is Carlos Acapo, because he did get burned a couple times on that right side. And Atlanta were clearly targeting that right side. Paul Marie had a really, really, really difficult task today because Atlanta United were not trying to play the ball through the middle. The Quakes mid-block, solid. They weren't getting through that. What they were trying to do was play the ball long over the top to the left and get guys 1v1 versus Paul Marie. And that's a lot of pressure for Paul Marie. And we know he's improved leaps and bounds every season over the last few years. But that's still a lot on his shoulders in this game. I thought he played well. I thought he was unlucky to give away that penalty. I can't think of a softer, sort of lower XG situation turned into a penalty. I thought Paul Marie played pretty well. Honestly, I thought Paul Marie was stronger than Carlos Acapo. Carlos Acapo, let's be fair, is not 100% match fit yet. That is why he came on in the 60th minute only for 30 minutes, is because he's not 100% match fit. But he did get turned a couple of times. And his 1v1 defending wasn't as strong as I was expecting, which is tough because that's what he's there to do. He's not there to be a right winger bombing down the ring a la Dani Alves. He looked kind of lost going forward. He looked like he didn't know exactly how to connect with Christian Espinoza. Paul Marie knows how to connect with Christian Espinoza. They have a strong connection on that right side. So I'm uncertain how Luchi Gonzalez should handle that going forward, because I think the consensus was that once Carlos Acapo is 100% match fit, he's the natural guy to take that starting position on the right side. After this performance, I'm not so sure about that. I think Paul Marie has a serious shot of maintaining that starting spot.
I want to really quickly direct folks over to quakesepicenter.com. Colin, you wrote an article last season in regards to the acquisitions of Carlos Acapo and Rodriguez. And so I wanted to give folks that opportunity to go over and check out quakesepicenter.com to read up on the scouting report in regard to these players. And Colin, I'm going to kick it over to you really quickly here to get your thoughts in regards to Acapo's performance. Yes, I agree with Alex here that he wasn't necessarily match fit, but is he the player to take over that position, or is Paul Marie the right choice for Luchi Gonzalez over there on that side of the defense?
Yeah, one thing to keep in mind with Acapo is this was his first competitive match since I think it was April of last year or early May of last year. So it's totally sensible. He had a broken foot that he was rehabbing for the rest of the duration of 2022. And then in early 2023, he had another knock during preseason, kind of interrupted his recovery. It's not surprising to me that he's a step off the pace. And I would say the same, a similar, not quite as extreme, but a similar caveat for Gruezo as well. When you come in the middle of preseason, switching leagues, you're not necessarily going to be right up to snuff with everybody else immediately either. So I think that Acapo, will only get stronger and better within this system. And ultimately speaking, yes, he will be a much better choice than Paul Marie going forward in the sense of, later in the season. But yeah, we have to wait for him to kind of catch up to that. So I don't think it's necessarily going to happen immediately. I think Marie actually is a better, more refined player on the ball and combining getting forward. But I know just from talking to the technical staff that, the limitations he has as a defender were concerning. And Acapo was a pretty strong defender in La Liga. He's a very athletic guy and should be able to handle those duties. So I think that everyone's counting on that to happen. If it doesn't happen, that's a problem. And then for the other additions, I would just mention that Miguel Trauco, I thought had a pretty strong performance tonight, but you can tell that he is not the athlete that Marcos Lopez was. He can't, when he makes a mistake, he can't just, turn on the afterburners and recover the same way that Lopez did. And it got a little bit close to being a problem once or twice, but mostly he managed to take care of business. So it was kind of interesting to watch the both of them there. I think this back setup, the personnel, relatively well settled. I'm not super worried about it over the season, as we've been saying.
Look, Rodriguez, Mensah, even Daniel, those offseason signings, I think you can be pretty confident about that they're adding value to the team. But those transfers last August, Miguel Trauco and Carlos Acapo, were always confusing, and they're still a little bit confusing to me at this point because they didn't make an impact last season. They were signed late August when the Quakes were, struggling to stay in the playoff race, but it was too late for them to make any meaningful impact. And they're also not exactly the guys who I'd want to build around. They're both old. They're not fantastic sort of athletes at this stage in their career. They don't have the physical prowess that they might have had when they were playing back in Spain. And I'm not entirely sure if they're going to be upgrades this season. So those are still kind of spots of concern for me. I'm still a little confused about those signings. It felt like maybe just signings for the sake of signings, and it wasn't as sort of well thought out and well prepared as the rest of the work that Chris Leach has done, which has been fantastic. So if I may put a pin in that. Go ahead, Colin.
If I may, I
Colin, please.
I don't know if Alex is intentionally setting up the article that I most recently wrote for Quakes Epicenter about the turnover in the defense, and that means the turnover for the guys that they've added so far, but then also really importantly, the upcoming potential turnover of this entire back line. So Alex is exactly right. They brought in, they got rid of 2 defenders over the summer. They brought in 2 other defenders, actually 3, Rodriguez, Acapo, and Trauco in August and September. So clearly was not with 2022 in mind. So they set up a back line this year that the front office, the way that they're thinking about this is for right back, we're not good enough at defending with Paul Marie, and we don't have good enough defensive options other than him. Let's get Acapo. He's a defensive upgrade, and offensively, maybe, a sort of wash, maybe a bit of a back grade. For Trauco, we're relatively going to trust him defensively. He's going to be all right offensively. He doesn't have the upside of Lopez, but he'll be all right. Rodriguez, it's better than Calvo defensively, and he's at least going to stick around. And with Nathan, the replacement there with Mensah, they certainly were aware that Jonathan Mensah was on the market, but I don't think they were going to make that trade until Nathan went down because of the money involved in it. Daniel and JT, we've covered on the show a lot about the distinction between the two and why they felt the need to go out and get Daniel. And by the way, the resolution of the discussion about whether or not it's worth it to invest that money in him is a little bit independent on whether or not he could have gotten the goals tonight. I think that's a much bigger topic that has a lot of other variables. But take all that into place. They've remade the back line because they think this one is stronger than the one that they had last year. However, almost every player I just named is going to be rolling off the books after this season, or at least has the option to roll off the books for the club. And that tells you that this club has not decided that Trauco and Alcapo and Rodriguez and Nathan and Mensah, all 5 of whom don't have guaranteed contracts for next year, are necessarily the back line of the future for the Quakes to build on. So for all of those guys, they think that they have a better back line this year because they want to do as well as they can this year. But they did not find the long-term building block pieces that they were looking for. So what they did, they put stuff into place that was better for the short term, and they gave themselves the option to completely wipe the slate clean again if they don't like what they see. So I think it actually does make a lot of sense from a roster building perspective, but it's going to be very turbulent, and it does mean that they don't have a long-term foundation yet built there.
Again, folks, make sure you check out Colin's work, quakesepicenter.com. Alex, you have some comments here from Benji Kikanovic, and unfortunately, we weren't able to actually have the press conference shown on the show today as we normally do. So, I could just briefly characterize Benji in these press conferences. He's usually really straightforward and direct, and sometimes biting in his comments, and very honest and what he gives in these press conferences. So I'm interested to see if it's the same from Benji or if we're getting something a little more reserved from him. Either way, I know it's going to be good content. So Alex, give us what you got.
Benji's got swagger. He's got swagger. Is the number one thing to know about Benji Kikanovic post-match press conference is the confidence and the swagger that he brings to that press conference. We've said it before. He feels like a FIFA career mode character that you're playing with. The hot shot number 9 is what it feels like talking to Benji Kikanovic in the post-match press conferences. Just a short one with him today. Because of all the things moving around with the Apple TV setup, we weren't able to actually speak to him live as we usually are. But we were able to grab a few questions, submit a few questions, and get some responses. He felt confident about the way that the Quakes played in the first half. That's what Luchi Gonzalez said as well. Everybody knew it. The Quakes were the better team in that half. The quote that Benji Kikanovic said was they were, and I quote, cooking on all cylinders. And I have to concur with that assessment. In regards to the set piece goals in the second half, he said he's not quite sure what happened. The sense that I got is they knew that somebody should have been marking Almada. Somebody should have been top of the box to block that. But he wasn't sure why that happened. And Luchi Gonzalez was clearly mad about that as well when we spoke to him a little bit earlier. And the thing that Luchi Gonzalez said for some of those who weren't here earlier is that somebody was supposed to be on him. One of the substitutes was supposed to be on him, but didn't know their role and didn't have their role down when everything got changed around with the second half substitutions. Now, the last thing that Benji Kikanovic says is, look, adding a little bit of perspective. It's a new year. This is the first game. He said, it sucks, but we just got to keep going. And that's true. This is the first game of the season, and it feels bad for the Earthquake fans because they're used to this, right? Because the team has done this over and over and over again for the last decade. So it feels like same old, but it's not same old, same old. This is very clearly a different team with much better structure, with a much better defense, and sort of a much different tactical plan going forward. And looking back on this, I think you can take away a very strong performance from this game, a team that outplayed Atlanta United for most of the game. And I think that even though there's frustration, and Luchi Gonzalez was definitely pissed off, I think Benji Kikanovic was able to communicate that they're going to take that away as well. They're going to take away the fact that they went to Atlanta United, first game of the season in Mercedes-Benz Stadium, and played them off the field for most of the game. And this is not an Atlanta United team that they've been in the past. This is an Atlanta United team that's clearly still figuring it out, that clearly still doesn't have it all together. They were missing a few of their best players, number 9, number 6 in there. But it's still a tough place to play, and there's still a lot of positives to take away from this performance.
All right, thanks for that, Alex. We're going to go ahead and move to the last segment of the show here. As we always do, get the final thoughts from our panel, and I would like to bring it back over to Robert Jonas. Robert, your final thoughts, your concluding thoughts after this match, and what can we look forward to as the Quakes head into Vancouver, or their home match against Vancouver?
Yeah, no, I'm happy that guys are pissed because, on this side of the ledger, you're up a goal into stoppage time, into extra time. You expect a result, and while probably for the rest of the country, I flipped over to MLS 360 on the season pass to just in time to see Taylor Twellman comment about how Almada, basically beat the Quakes. And that's going to be the story around the league. Almada scores a brace in extra time and beats the San Jose Earthquakes, not the Earthquakes blew it and lost in the last minute. Now, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I mean, they were beaten by a quality player in a very tough environment. Beyond that, I think, looking ahead to Vancouver, the Quakes need to bottle that anger, bottle that intensity, and find a way to come out with the same type of intensity they did in this game, to really put Vancouver on their back heels, to impose a little bit more in the midfield, to keep that momentum so that their attack can be effective. It was a bit spotty today, and especially at the end when the legs went a little off. That's something that another week of fitness hopefully will really go better. And lastly, I do want to say that I think this Apple TV deal is great. I don't think the Quakes have ever looked better on TV, and maybe that's because they were finally in 1080p and it just looked fantastic. And I look forward to kind of getting a lot more of that exposure of around the league as we go forward. So kudos to so far what we've seen on the Apple deal.
All right, let's go ahead and move over to Colin Etnier.
Here, Robert. That was about as good. The audio had some question marks, but the video was sparkling and exquisite. And for those of you who've been MLS fans for a very long time, it was very novel to experience that. The thought I had about this game, I'm a big believer in this as a life philosophy, but we actually got both sides of the coin of one of my favorite phrases or my favorite kind of aphorisms, which is you're never as good as you look when you're up, and you're never as bad as you look when you're down. The Quakes were not as good as they looked in the first 30 minutes when they were up and when they were dominant and they were have really good combination play. They're also not as bad as they looked in the last 5 minutes of stoppage time. The reality is somewhere in between those two things. It's always important to not get too high when you're doing well. It's important not to get too low when you're not. But I think that middle ground, if you kind of comb through it all, actually speaks to a good season, a better season certainly than last year. I don't know if it's a playoff team, but I'm very confident on the basis of what we saw today that this will be an improved season. And I think Luchi Gonzalez did a largely very good job. And it's going to be up to the front office to maybe add a piece or two to fix some of those issues we talk about, for the players to up their game, for Luchi to keep on implementing that system to make sure that the details get sorted out. But somewhere in the middle between the highs and the lows is actually a halfway decent team. And honestly, that's a huge relief after the last couple of years, and certainly the last couple of decades, maybe, as a Quakes fan.
All right, Alex Morgan, your final thoughts.
Look, it's a new season. I'm so happy to be here with all of you on the Aftershock. This is our third season covering the team with the Aftershock. And I think it's my 9th or 10th season. I need to go back and do some recounting. But I'm excited about this season because this is a new era for the Earthquakes. This is the Luchi Gonzalez era. This is the start of the Luchi Gonzalez era tonight. And I thought that it confirmed a lot of the things that we knew or that we were expecting tonight. It confirmed that this defense is stronger, that this defense is not going to ship 69 goals again this season, that Jonathan Mensah and Rodriguez are going to be rocks back there, and it's going to be much stronger. And that alone will be enough to make the Quakes competitive in most of the games that they play, and a team that can push the envelope for making the playoffs this season. An expanded playoff format, they have no excuse not to make the playoffs. I fully expect them to be making the playoffs. It also confirmed that there's going to be some debate about JT Marcinkowski and Danielle in goal. The Danielle signing has the potential to add value to this team, given his shot-stopping ability, but that there will still be some question marks and some doubts, and it might actually go back and forth. That was one of the things we asked Luchi Gonzalez in preseason. I asked him this in our interview with me and Jamin, was, are you going to feel comfortable taking one in, putting the other one in, rotating them, swapping them throughout the season? He said yes. He said that's something they're open to, and that could happen. So that confirmed that. It confirmed that Christian Espinosa is still the guy on the right wing. He is still capable of being one of the best wingers in Major League Soccer. It confirmed that Cade Cowell still has a lot of work to do and isn't the player that I think a lot of people on the national landscape are expecting him to be. Still has a lot of positive attributes and is capable of being a game changer, but still has a lot of things that he needs to work on in his touch, in the runs that he's making in behind. A lot of promise from him tonight. I thought that the off-ball runs that he was making that allowed Jeremy Ebobisse to score, that created a couple of other opportunities, were something that we haven't really seen from him before. But you still know that his touch needs work. And it also confirmed that the midfield is going to be stronger, that you have a guy like Carlos Carrezo in there who's doing the job that he needs to do, right? Last season, the Quakes didn't have the defensive destroyer in the midfield. They have that guy now. Even though he was a little bit tired at the end of the game, he was stripping Almada of the ball. He was dominating that midfield. That's not something that the Quakes has had, protecting their back line in the past. So based on all of those things, which we kind of already knew and were confirmed tonight, the Quakes are going to be a competitive team this season. And this is a season that Earthquakes fans can be optimistic about. Even though tonight was an incredibly frustrating performance, I think we can still take that away from this game.
Yeah, I'm also very optimistic about what Carlos Grueso is going to bring to this team. I think he immediately comes into the Earthquakes as one of the better central defensive midfielders in the league. It's a great signing, and I think we're going to see the benefits of that as we move into the matches as they continue, as we see him come into fitness. Another thing, though, too, that I wanted to touch on, Alex, that you had mentioned is Cade Cowell and some of the better things that we saw from him. Although one big area of concern that I feel is his decision making on the ball is still questionable. We saw instances in which he would, dribble right into 4 defenders, rather than trying to find the escape route, whether it be a pass or making a touch elsewhere. So that is still a concern. I am, though, very optimistic about Jackson Yueill, as I had mentioned earlier in the show. Considering what you said about his performances in preseason and what we saw tonight, I think there's a lot of good things to look forward to from Yueill this season. And so that's something I'm really going to be looking at in the Vancouver match at home next weekend. So with Yueill, Grueso functioning well, I do expect Jamiro Montero to be able to do his job in the central attacking midfield position, or more of the 10 position, where he can be highly effective finding the passes on the wings or finding those cutting passes, breaking lines, and finding Jeremy Ebobisse as well. Before we ended the show, I just wanted to say that this is my 10th year covering the team. I started in 2014 with Quakes After 90. And so I wanted to give a very special thanks to the guys over there at Quakes After 90. We will keep that show going in some way. So big thanks to Bill and Dom and Zach and Sterling. You guys are amazing. Thank you for everything. And I also wanted to give a very special shout out to Jesus Cano, who did join us. He joined us tonight, and he has contributed to Quakes Epicenter in the past. The reason why Jesus, where he is now is really important to me is because he went to the high school that I taught at for nearly a decade. And he went through the program, the Puente program, which is a program that I taught for and I'm currently working for at the University of California. Jesus recently found out that he is going to be working for MLB.com. And I think that's really awesome, Jesus, that you are doing that you are there, and that you are moving into this part of your life. So I wanted to acknowledge that here on the show. So thank you for your contributions to Quakes Epicenter, and also for inspiring a lot of young learners in Pittsburgh and in the Puente program. And lastly, I know you have something you wanted to say, Alex. I wanted to thank the Quakes Epicenter team, everybody who's involved with Quakes Epicenter. Thank you all very much. So Alex, I'll give you that last little bit you wanted to chime in with, and then I'm going to direct everyone over to quakesepicenter.com and our social media one last time. What you got?
There was mustache talk in the chat. I think it's about your mustache, Phil. But something that we forgot to mention was the mustache on the Quakes tonight.
It's very Central Valley looking mustache. I will say that as somebody
that
from the
he was
Central
growing
Valley
out. So some grooming, some sartorial discussion that we can save for a later date. But I want to put a pin in that to see how that develops over the course of this season. That's a storyline we're going to be watching here in the Aftershock.
And yeah, my mustache, for those of you who know me personally, I do theater. I was playing Gomez in the musical version of the Addams Family out here in the East Bay, and so that's why I had the mustache grown out. Now, I think I am starting to grow it back. I'm not quite sure. The wife loves it, which means I probably should have it. So that's why I kind of have half of a mustache going here, and that one's for you, Ben. Anyway, I would like to encourage everyone to visit quakesepicenter.com for all of our great articles, once again, by our great writers, Alex, Robert, Colin, Jamin, Asher. There's like a ton of good content there, and Abe Patel as well, who occasionally will drop in a great article. So make sure you check that out. Visit us on social media, follow us on Twitter, follow us on Instagram at Quakes Epicenter, and make sure you check out our Patreon. For just $5 a month, you can join the Slack. It's a lot of fun, and you'll be in a community of a lot of really serious and fun at the same time Quakes fans. There it is at the bottom of the screen. Make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on those notifications. We'll be doing our best to join you after every match of the season with the press conference, and we're looking to have those technical difficulties fixed so that you can actually hear the words from the players' mouths and from Luchi Gonzalez's mouth as well. Again, thank you all, and have a good night.